Hello everyone, I'm Ben Coleman, your anchor host for the Florida Aviation Network, coming to you live and in the clear. Sun and Fun 49, and we're here at the Aerospace Center for Excellence, actually in the high school, Central Florida Aerospace Academy. And we are, as usual, we are no stranger to pulling in some of the best talent, some of the most influential people in the world, primarily in the warbird industry. We have Mr. Larry Kelly with us here with Panchito. It's a B-25 that is out on the flight line, and she's spectacular. Larry Kelly is right there on camera.
Morning, Ben.
Hey, Larry. We're so far away on the set, I would shake your hand.
Yeah, it seems odd sitting this far away from you.
Yeah, we'll do the
obligatory
we'll do a
virtual shake.
Okay.
We did so much virtual for the last 3 years.
But that's okay. We spread out a little bit, and we're trying to, in your fashion, do things a little bit better, a little cleaner, because you do it every year, cleaner and better.
We try.
Larry, tell us a little bit about, I know we have some talking points we want to get into here, and you had something special that you wanted to do at the end of your session.
We'll see
here.
if we have time.
If we have time. Mm-hmm. But tell us a little bit about the Doolittle Raider reunions and Dick Cole's burial.
Some of the greatest honors in my life was meeting and becoming part of the Doolittle Raider family, starting back in 1998, the reunion down in Sarasota. And you know, if you own a B-25, you sort of automatically become part of that, that family. But then, being asked to start to arrange the flying events for the reunions becomes very special, because then you get involved in a lot of the background stuff. But then, as the years progressed, and Tom Casey, who's the Doolittle Raiders manager, he lives over. He and I are doing a program here on Saturday out on the flight line, and we begin to realize that people talk about the Doolittle Raiders, and they don't really think about or talk about everything else that is involved and the other parts of human tragedy and human losses that was involved in that raid. The raid that changed the course of the war in the Pacific. 80 men, 16 airplanes. But, the 56 American airmen that came down in China, bailed out or ditched the airplanes, behind enemy lines in China, were rescued and by simple Chinese peasants, farmers, and militia. And over a period of days and sometimes weeks, were kept away from the marauding Japanese forces that were just infuriated that American bombers, for the first time in 2 millennia, the Japanese homeland had been attacked. So they began a rampage throughout China, and that story is so little known. And also, people think, the Raiders took off from the Hornet, the USS Hornet, brand new American carrier's first mission. But they don't know that the USS Hornet never celebrated its first birthday. It was sank by the Japanese at the Battle of Santa Cruz because they knew the Hornet was the launching point for the Doolittle Raiders. The Japanese were still infuriated, so they swarmed the Hornet until they sank it. So to us, it became important that we needed to bring together, to focus the history on the entire story. So we set forth to try to find survivors in China who were involved in helping the Raiders. We found 2 elderly ladies whose families had assisted. One was Doolittle's crew, and the other Travis Hoover's crew. It was interesting, this Chinese professor that was helping us in the Chuchao area try to locate these people, he found these ladies. People in town directed them to her. And when he went and interviewed her, says, "Do you remember, these American airmen?" And she said, "Oh yes." and she named them by name. After 70 years, she remembered all 5 of them by name, and she was 9 years old at the time. And then we had also, in the years leading up to the 7th reunion, we had located 2 survivors that were on board the Hornet from the time it was being outfitted in Norfolk, Virginia. And because they were on the Hornet then being outfitted, they knew the ship so well that they were able to find their way through a stairwell that was basically electrical conduit in the ship, and to get out of it, because they were 4 floors below when it started sinking, and was able to swim away from it. So they were on board from the time it was being outfitted until they swam away from it. It was being sinking, while nearly 200 of their shipmates went down with the Hornet when it was sank. So we brought together at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, all the elements of the raid: Hornet survivors, Chinese survivors, and the Raider survivors at the time, to tell that story and to remind people. Do you know that 250,000 Chinese died? 250,000 Chinese were massacred by Japanese troops simply because they were helping 56 young Americans. So today, when people start talking about China and China starts talking about America, maybe sometimes we need to look back at our history and remember who our friends were.
Yeah, yeah.
The Chinese people are just wonderful people, and you find that many times in governments. The people are wonderful. You just sometimes our leadership may forget who our friends are. Okay.
Well, I didn't know you were a statesman as well, Larry, but I'm not surprised.
I'm not, but we mentioned a little about Dick Cole's burial. That was very emotional for a lot of us, because that was the passing of the last Doolittle Raider. And as Dick said, the passing into history. There was no longer anybody firsthand out there to talk about the raid anymore. He was gone. So as, of course, COVID was delaying the burials, and everything was going crazy in Washington, so the family decided to go ahead and bury Dick at Fort Sam Houston, at the military cemetery at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, instead of at Arlington, which was the original plan. So the Air Force had contacted me and asked to help to coordinate with the Air Force a flyover for Dick Cole's burial. So it was a little too far for me to take Panchito to be involved with, so with B-25s being based out there. And the Commemorative Air Force has always stepped forward whenever we asked to help with Doolittle Raiders. Massive effort, anything we wanted, whatever we wanted, they always bring their airplanes and their crews. So we put together with Rod Lewis, who was a close friend of Dick, being in the pull position for the missing man, because he was the closest personally with Dick, so I wanted him in the missing man. And so we had 4 B-25s. We originally had 4 C-47s, because Dick was the first air commando, and he always considered that his greatest contribution to World War II, and his 3rd Distinguished Flying Cross was with the first air commandos flying C-47s. So we had 4 B-25s, 4 C-47s. We lost 2 due to mechanical problems, so we wound up with only 2. But then we had a flight of 4 F-15s from the Louisiana Air National Guard, the Bayou Militia. And so we staged them all and worked out the timing, and of course I'm sweating bullets. We were having trouble with communication. I had this big backpack VHF radio I was having to wear to be able to communicate with them, because they were 25 miles out in holding positions. And General Brown was there, the new Chief Staff of the Air Force. And it just couldn't have worked out better. The timing, I was so proud of the guys. They nailed the timing right to it. So just as General Brown accepts the folded flag from Dick's coffin, he kneels to present the flag to Cindy just as the 4 B-25s pass over and they do the missing man pull.
Wow.
Couldn't have been better. And then the C-47s right behind them, and then a few seconds later, the flight of 4 F-15s, Eagles. And I'd asked them, instead of doing a traditional missing man, let's take Dick to the heavens. So they pulled vertical, went to full blower, and his missing man pull was a vertical pull.
Out of sight.
And so that was the, I had the honor for 25 years of planning and flying events, but that was the last one. So.
Well, Larry, there's a lot that you have shared with the industry and the world, and you're still sharing it. And tell us about some of your training. What do you do for the training for the B-25?
Well, we have, to my knowledge, the only fully enclosed turnkey B-25 flight training program in the world, where pilots, if you have a multi-engine rating, at least a private pilot rating and a multi-engine rating and a current medical. It could be third class. It can't be the basic med, but you got to have at least a third class medical, multi-engine rating, and a private pilot. Then we can accept you into pilot training at our home base in Georgetown, Delaware. And from just an hour of orientation training, dual instruction, all the way through a second command rating, which is a weekend trip, or for a full type rating, which is 8 days of flight training and then a check ride. We have a check airman, one of only 6, there's not even 6 left now. I think we're down to like 4 or 5 check airmen for the B-25 on staff. So we do it all self-contained at our home base in Georgetown, Delaware. Information is available to anybody, just very simple, DelawareAviationMuseum.org. And flight training, click on flight training, or come out and see us out at the airplane. We have our director of flight training, Sabrina Kipp, is right there at the airplane. We'd be glad to talk to anybody. And it's really become international. And we have a class coming up at the end of the month. We have a student come from Austria, one coming from Dublin, Ireland, and then one it's fairly local, and one coming from Texas. And so it really has become an international training program. And it's recognized as a quality program by the FAA. We've actually been complimented on the quality of the training and the depth of the training that we do.
What's your average size of class, Larry? I'm just kind of curious. 4? Okay.
If it's an SIC class, it's 4.
Okay.
We just can't give the personal attention needed for anything larger than that. And it's all-day training on Friday. It's ground school and hands-on in the hangar, because we go beyond just simply showing you the power charts and takeoff, landing, accelerate to stop, and all that stuff. That puts you to sleep. But I also have what I call a show and tell table. I have all kinds of parts spread out, and we go through what I've learned in 25 years of experience is common failure modes and how to recognize, do you have a nuisance or do you have a real failure? That low pressure indication, is that an indication problem, or do you have really low oil pressure? So we go through all of these old systems that many people don't even understand how they work, to make sure people understand a good pilot is one that understands when something is not going right. Is it really a problem, or is it an emergency? So we teach a lot of that as well.
So when the pressure's going down and the temperature's going up, it's got your attention.
Well, you always look for a secondary indication.
Okay. Larry, tell us a little bit about what you're doing for the warbird being icons, as far as trying to keep all this alive and relevant.
Yeah, I did a program at the Warbird Operators Conference a couple months ago, and that went over well, because what I wanted to do is to illustrate how, if you want to just get in a hot rod airplane and be macho, go buy an extra 300 or something, or a Pitts. But if you're going to get into warbirds, warbirds are icons of our military history, and treat it that way. And use these warbirds to keep alive the memories of all the veterans that climbed in the airplanes, and then their commanding officers had to write letters home to the girlfriends, wives, mothers the next day. So remember that every time you climb in the airplane, and use that. You fly these airplanes respectfully, and use those to help keep the memory alive. I was just mentioned the 70th anniversary. What made that really such an internationally recognized event was the fact we had 20 B-25s there. And so we used the airplanes, and then use that to bring focus to the human story with the Chinese and the Hornet survivors and everything. So use the airplanes to tell that story, find out what the history is of your aircraft and your type, and then use it to keep those stories alive. Now, we're doing a program right here on Friday with an O2. A Cessna Skymaster.
Know it well.
But the story is about Mark Renault's father. The U.S. government has made 24 trips into the jungle to try to find and locate his father's airplane that was shot down in Vietnam. They just located it.
Wow.
So for 50 years, that family's had no closure. They just located the wreckage and human remains.
Wow, 50 years.
His family's now going to have closure. 24 times our government has gone out still trying to locate the wreckage of that one aircraft and those 2 airmen that went down.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
That is remarkable.
The remarkable thing is Mark's dad trained at Vance Air Force Base while Panchito was based there as a multi-engine trainer. He probably flew my airplane.
It all comes full circle, doesn't it, Larry? Larry, I've been told that you're the custodian of something that's it's almost a national treasure.
Well, yes, I'll try to condense the story a little bit. Back a number of years ago, when Dick Cole was still getting around really well, we would meet over at Sarasota right around the Sun and Fun time, and we'd do an event called Take a Ride on a B-25 with a Doolittle. How many people can say they got in a B-25 and flew it with a Doolittle? So Dick would get on board, and we would sell 5 tickets to 5 people, and I would put out the airplane and all the expenses of the airplane myself, and then all the ticket sales went to the James H. Doolittle Scholarship Fund, which very much like the Aerospace Center for Excellence would, oh yeah, there's a photo of Dick and I flying down to Punta Gorda. He flew the air show that weekend at 96 years old.
Wow, that's great.
But so the James H. Doolittle Scholarship Fund is one of the scholarships the students here are able to actually apply for. So we had a half-page ad in a newspaper the newspaper gave us for free, and Don Penny Snyder saw the ad, or his wife saw the ad, and said, you were to go out there and meet this guy. So Don came out. Now, Don Snyder came out of Hollywood. He was in the Ford administration, and he was a comedian, writer, actor, etc., and was working with Jerry Ford. And at a reception at the White House, General Doolittle was there, and Gerald Ford asked him, can you help General Doolittle? He's got to write this speech, and he mentioned he's having some trouble writing it. So Don was introduced to General Doolittle that night, and they became very, very close friends. And it turns out they only lived 3 blocks from each other in California. So in 1992, after Doolittle had moved in to home with his son, John, out at Pebble Beach, Susan and Don were out there, and General Doolittle said, Don, you collect fine watches, don't you? Yes, sir. He said, well, here, take this one. He opened his desk drawer and handed his watch over to Don. And Don is looking at it, and he says, wow, this is a Longines Lindbergh hour angle watch. And he recognized the watch because it's an extremely fine timepiece. And he asked the general, said, did you wear this on the raid? He said, yeah. And he said, wore it all during the war. And he had given it to his son Jim, and then after his son Jim's death, the watch came back to him, but he never wore it again. So he gave it to Don and said, Don, you know, the Aerospace Museum wants this, and I'm just not going to give it to them because they'll put it in a drawer.
Uh-oh.
They'll put it in a drawer, and nobody will ever see it again. So
a little technical issue there.
Yeah, let me just sort of try to stand this thing back up here.
There you go.
So they'll just put it in a drawer and nobody will ever see it again. He gave it to Don and said, use this to keep the story of my boys alive, and then you find the next custodian for this. And then Don came out that day, and he just walked up to Dick and just laid his wrist down like this on the table in front of Dick, and Dick looked over and he said, boy, I haven't seen that in a long time. He recognized it right away. And of course, then that's when I got the chance to put it on. And then Don flew with us to a number of events. He flew with us when we delivered the Congressional Gold Medal to the Doolittle Raiders at Wright Pat. And when we flew for the 75th anniversary for the final toast, all the different events that I had organized out at the Air Force Museum and others. So at that time, he had found the next custodian, is what he told me. So this past November, I was visiting with Don over in Palmetto, and he said the time has come, and he passed that icon over to me.
Wow.
So right now, I am now the custodian, because you don't own something like Jimmy Doolittle's wristwatch. But,
wow.
You know, he passed that over to me, and I was able to.
Camera 3.
Yeah. So now, you know, I'm
Push in.
the temporary custodian. My job is to find the next custodian and then use this as an icon to help remember, because this wristwatch was on Jimmy Doolittle's wrist when he bailed out over China. And
hold that up one more time, there,
yeah.
Larry. He's going to focus in on that so we can see. There we go.
Yeah.
That's
and
great.
on the back, you know, it says Colonel Charles. It says Colonel Charles Lindbergh, Longines hour angle watch.
Wow.
You use the watch, you can calculate your longitude.
And that's a one of, I would imagine.
There were very few made. They're very valuable. There were very few made in the 30s, and then Longines reintroduced the watch in the 60s.
Hold it like that, Larry.
For the 60th anniversary. And then they just came out with a 90th anniversary edition, but it was sold out immediately.
Wow. But he was wearing that when he went in.
He told Don Snyder that this was the watch that he wore on the raid April 18th.
Wow.
Now, the band that was on it then has long since deteriorated and been replaced. Doolittle had a little metallic band on it when he gave it to Don Snyder, and then Don had put a leather band on it, but it was not the original band. And then after the watch came to me in November, I went out on the internet and found a dealer that still sold vintage Longines wristbands along with many other vintage watch parts, and was able to find and replace the band with an original vintage Longines band. So,
wow. Yeah. Well, that's, you know, it's it kind of gives you goosebumps when you've got a piece of history. Well, that's just there in your hands, isn't it?
It is, but when I look at this, what I see is a story of heroism, commitment, men who, you know, climbed in the airplanes to take off. And I tell you, if you want to upset a Doolittle Raider, you say a suicide mission. It was not a suicide mission. The original plan was to fly the airplanes, bomb Japan, land in China, refuel, fly on to Chongqing. The airplanes would be given to the American Volunteer Group to form a nucleus of a bomber command for the AVG, because, you know, this is prior to the AVG being inducted into becoming the 23rd Fighter Group. So they were still basically an army. They were the Chinese Air Force. So the airplanes were going to be given to the Chinese. That was the original plan. But since they were spotted and had to take off earlier, you know, they took off knowing they probably did not have enough fuel to make the landing sites in Chuchao, but they all did. They all made that area but they got there in the night in the storm. They couldn't find the airfield because the NDB never made it to the airfield, so they couldn't home in on anything. They couldn't visually see it because of the storms they were in. So as they flew around the area trying to find the 3 different airfields they were supposed to land in, they wound up having to make the decisions to either to ditch the airplanes like Ted Lawson and a couple of others, or like Doolittle, climb to 9,000 feet and bail out.
Wow. Well, Larry, I honestly say that it's always a pleasure to have you here on the set, and I look forward to many, many more. But I want to learn more about the flight training for the B-25, and anyone, if you ever have an interest in, we're not going to have too many more of these opportunities in these warbirds. There's going to be a time when it's going to be more and more difficult to keep the airplanes flying. I was just telling you earlier, you know, a tire for a B-25 right now is $7,800 just for one tire, and $800 for the tube to go in it. Wow.
And there's 56 brake rotors in a B-25 at $135 a piece. You know, so the cost of keeping these airplanes going is becoming exponential. It's becoming very, very expensive. And there's only one way to do it, is to do it right. So and the warbird community as a whole, you know, I have seen mature much more in that direction of doing it right. The new Professional Warbird Operators organization is just being wholeheartedly welcomed by the warbird community as is needed, and it's all going to be about professionalism. It's like a physician getting a board certification. Warbird operators now become part of this, and they get a lot of this additional training that they're going to need for safety. They'll get guidance. They will get leadership, professionalism, mentoring. You know, new people coming into warbirds can join the organization and get that mentorship and that training and a whole cultural shift to where, you know, many of us feel that we should be in protecting these icons of our military history. You know, as Walt Ulrich said, you know, we're temporary custodians, so we got to treat them right, fly them right, and keep the stories going for the next generation. So there's many of us that feel that way. It's
time, Larry. It's time. And thank you again for joining us, and I want to see you out on the ramp.
Well, come on out. And anybody else would like to come out and talk about the flight training, we'd love to talk to them. We'll be here all week long. And you can't miss us when you come on the warbird ramp. We're the big shiny bird sitting right there.
with no scratches on
it. Well, let's hope not.
Okay. All right, we're going to sign this one off. I'm Ben Coleman, your anchor host here at the Florida Aviation Network, 49th Annual Sun and Fun International Expo, and I will see you on the flight line. Take care.